All right, so let's start this broadcast with a big story that we are tracking at this hour. The United States Congress has failed to pass a funding plan, which now effectively means that the government of the United States of America is headed for a shutdown. You heard that right. This shutdown will come into effect from the 1st of October. And once the American government shutdown comes into effect, no one can predict as to how long it will last. But it can, of course, have some pretty long-lasting implications. To begin with, the shutdown could have some direct bearing on the jobs of millions of federal employees. The crisis has been a result of the continuing political logjam, as House Republicans on Friday rejected a last-ditch plan that was proposed by their own leader, Speaker Kevin McCarthy, to keep the funds flowing for the federal agencies, making it all but certain that federal agencies will partially shut down. There are 232 against 198 vote. The House defeated a measure that would extend government funding by 30 more days to avert a shutdown. This deadline is to approve the new budget legislation to fund the United States government over the next fiscal year.
The CR didn't pass, but it's just like in life. If you quit after the first time, it's only a failure if you quit.
Now, McCarthy had proposed a stopgap measure which would have funded the government for another month while enacting several spending cuts on most federal agencies. Now, this bill would have restricted immigration, which is a Republican priority. However, 21 Republicans had joined the Democrats in opposing the legislation. Meanwhile, the Senate is working on its own stopgap bill, which will extend the current funding levels for a period of 45 days. This will include additional funding for Ukraine and also the U.S. disaster relief. However, it is yet to see whether the House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, will introduce the Senate's bill on the House floor. The Hardline Republicans have threatened to revoke his speakership if he does so. With the political deadlock over funding, federal agencies will partially begin to shut down from Sunday. It is expected that hundreds of thousands of federal workers will be temporarily forced to leave work without pay. While workers deemed essential will remain on the job, but they will continue working without getting paid. The shutdown will inflict disruptions to a whole range of public services and will wreak significant damage on the national economy if it becomes a prolonged one. And not just this, it will also affect millions of people across the United States of America who rely on federal programs, be it in terms of food assistance or Medicare and Social Security. Now, apart from the domestic impact, the shutdown will also dent America's foreign ties. Some foreign aid programs could also run out of money or could have trouble performing their missions. There could also be delays in responding to a crisis and providing health assistance to other nations. Meanwhile, there will be a huge impact on the defense front as well. Roughly about half of the Pentagon civilian employees will be furloughed. Now, some deliveries of defense articles could, of course, be slowed or paused. Pentagon had warned that it will negatively affect the planned training for Ukrainian pilots who are preparing to fly the F-16 fighter jets. Meanwhile, President Biden has said that the government shutdown will be a neglect of duty for the American troops.
I've been here a long time. I've never seen anything like this. It's outrageous, and it must stop. Their promotions, their careers, their families, their future, held hostage by the political agenda of one senator and the silence of another 47 of them. It's a drag on our force. It impacts everything from readiness to morale to retention. It's an insult to the officers.
All right, now to give us more perspective in terms of what it, of course, means for the American people and what this government shutdown actually is, we're being joined by Mr. Daniel Geltrude, an American business analyst and economist. He's joining us live from New Jersey. Now, Mr. Geltrude, for people who are watching this from outside the United States of America, give us a sense of what does it mean when people say that the U.S. government will shut down because the U.S. Congress could not agree upon a funding plan. Because what the details that are coming out means is that people who work for the US government will either not be paid, even though they'd still be reporting for work, or they could in fact be laid off for the time being till a funding plan is in fact reached. Give us a sense of what it means.
So many people are going to be impacted in a lot of different ways. And under the American system, the U.S. Congress basically has control over spending and budgeting. And the reason it's set up that way is it's a check on executive power. So there needs to be accountability to the public, and there also needs to be financial discipline. That's conceptually what's supposed to happen. Of course, it becomes political. So what you have here primarily right now is Republicans fighting with other Republicans. It's not so much Republicans and Democrats, which is really what's causing people to be very concerned that this could be drawn out for some period of time. Now, when we're talking about the U.S. government shutting down, it's not a complete shutdown, as you were talking about. It's all about non-essential services and those employees being furloughed. Now, ultimately, when funding and the budget is reestablished, all of those people will get paid for the time they were not permitted to work. But in the meantime, the longer this goes on, the worse it gets for everyone.
You know, it's very interesting that you say that this is something that is part of the American system and this is how things work. But for people who are watching this from the outside of the United States of America, when the term that the U.S. government will shut down because a deal could not be reached within the U.S. Congress is a bit scary. So give us a sense of what are those non-essential services that will actually get shut down because the Republicans within the U.S. Congress have not been able to agree with each other.
So non-essential services, there's so many of them, even as it pertains, let's say, to the military, which people would overall look at that and say, well, that's absolutely essential. It is, other than there are many civilian positions within the U.S. military that are deemed not essential. So those people would be essentially out of work. All the contractors which work for the U.S. government, which are owed money, let's say, are not going to be paid until this situation has been rectified. So it's not as if the entire government shuts down and everyone goes home. It's that portions of the government begin to shut down. And when those things start to happen, more and more pressure builds on politicians to find compromise, and that's what we're talking about. No one wants a compromise initially. They want others to feel some pain.
All right, my last final question to you is, because this, I presume, is something that would happen every year when the Americans need to pass their budget. So how frequently does the United States of America suffer a government shutdown, as it is put, and how badly does it affect the American economy?
Well, actual shutdowns are not as common as these budget fights. What we have seen in the past is right up until the last minute, the sides are fighting. It looks like no one wants to give in, and then a deal is struck. Many people don't think that's going to be the case right now because you have intra-party fighting, and that's why this may be a little bit more serious. But to be honest with you, many Americans have become used to this, and they're not actually paying attention because this seems to be just the normal political foolishness that we've been seeing so often. It's not a good thing, but people are getting tired of it, and they're not paying attention quite as much.
All right. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Geltrud, for joining us and getting us those insights. It now remains to be seen as to how much longer it takes for the Republicans to, of course, get their act together and to agree upon this funding bill. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.